Hey everybody, Who's Your Jedi here with another review for you. This time talking episode 9 of Supergirl called Blood Bonds. And for this episode review, I'm wearing this sweet Superman t-shirt that I happened to pick up over Christmas break. And I'm quite fond of it. It's pretty cool. So anyway, let's kind of get into it. Uh, Slightly disappointed that we didn't get a little bit more of an epic throwdown between Kara and Non in this episode, but okay. They kind of had to leave Lord Technology still standing for the rest of the episode, so that's forgivable. Now, them taking Henshaw captive, now that was a surprise. But it definitely did make for some interesting situations there. I really like that bit where they're at the prison and Non brings in the telepath, who's from a race I don't recognize, but am vaguely reminded of the race that Brainiac, or Brainiac 5 from the Legion of Superheroes, is from. Now, obviously, that's not the same race. It's just they both kind of have weird, kind of funny things going on with their foreheads, and also Brainiac 5's green. So yeah, but it would be pretty awesome if they were to somehow incorporate some alien species from stuff like Legion of Superheroes, or maybe even the Daxamites. Who, if you're not familiar with them from the comics, the Daxamites are an alien race that are very similar to Kryptonians, except instead of kryptonite, they're extremely vulnerable to lead, which means like lead poisoning is like the worst thing ever for a Daxamite. But anyway, I like that part where he's like trying to read Martian Manhunter's mind, and he's like, "Yeah, I got nothing." And this freaking telepath, apparently, I don't. I guess he hasn't ever tried to read a human's mind before, because he's just like, nothing sets off alarms in him. It's like, hey, wait a minute, this guy's mind. It's not a human mind. I don't know. Maybe the guy was just a really crap telepath. And then Non snaps his neck. It's just like, that I didn't like, because it's like, really, we have to go and make Non this cliche of a bad guy. I mean, really, because there have been many other interpretations of Non where he's a much more nuanced character. And the idea of, okay, here's Non, who's normally this sort of thuggish, silent guy, and he's portrayed as this sort of military dude. That's interesting, but here it's just the most cliche bad guy stuff ever. It's just like, really, man? I mean, okay, I'm just gonna let it go. Now, that continues into the end of the episode where Non is like, okay, we got him. All right, let's kill these guys. And in all fairness, that's smart, strategic thinking. But again, just the idea, it would have been, I think, much more interesting if he wanted to uphold the end of the bargain too, and is like, all right, he just sort of, him having her just look at Astra and go like, we're gonna uphold our end of the bargain, right? And her going, yeah. I mean, that would have given him a lot of depth as a character, shown that he had some sense of honor. Here, it just sort of feels like they're trying to just sort of set it up so that he's the real reason that Astra did all of this. He's the corrupting influence, and it just sort of feels like it just sort of feels like a cop out in a way for Astra and the choices that she's made. So the idea that, in a lot of ways, I think, it just kind of hit me. It sort of feels like they're turning Non into Lady Macbeth. Now, granted, I think Macbeth was a lot more guilty of. All right, well, I think you kind of get where I'm going with this. It sort of looks like they're going to be setting Non up as being the real reason that Astra did this, and if it hadn't been for him, she wouldn't have done all this stuff. Now, not that gets her a free pass on anything. She's still responsible for her own choices, but the idea that I don't like. I just the idea. I like the idea. It just sort of feels like, if that's what's happening here, then why is Astra the leader? If not, Non is the one who's sort of pushing things, who's making her do all of this, then again, why isn't he just openly the leader? All right. I'm just too irritated about that situation, and also I haven't read Macbeth since high school, so you'll have to forgive me if I'm a little hazy on the details. Anywho, speaking of characters that I'm a little bit frustrated with, we got Maxwell Lord here. Now it is interesting that he's apparently got a hologram of Red Tornado's arm sitting around in his Lord down in Lord Technologies. Where we also get to see the number 52 on that sign. Again, the number 52, very important in the DC lore. But him just being able to kick out the DEO, what exact legal authority does the DEO have? I mean, yes, this happened on private property, but I'm pretty sure this isn't a situation where Max can say, "Oh yeah, I'm not going to file any sort of police complaint, so get the hell off my land." I'm pretty sure that doesn't work that way because the DEO, at the end of the day, is a federal organization. They are a part of the United States federal government. And if you want to tell a federal agency to get the hell off your land, you're going to need some serious legal juice. And I don't think under those circumstances Maxwell Lord has that. I was like expected one of those guys to like whip out and like, hey, by the way, Mr. Lord, here's this legal paperwork that says we have every legal right in the world to come in here and find out just what in the hell happened. And then there's never mind that whole thing where he captures Jimmy Olsen, smashes up his camera, and says like, yeah, if I catch you again, it's not going to be you, the camera that gets smashed up. Okay, dude, if you take a frickin' wrench to Jimmy Olsen, you know that a dude in a big red cape and his blonde cousin are going to show up looking to stomp you into the dirt. Now, granted, they're not just going to bust into his office and like haul him up in the air and throw him off into the rings of Saturn. But again, if you do that sort of thing to Jimmy Olsen, you are going to be making two extraordinarily powerful enemies that you probably can't take. So it just sort of, rather than seeming ominous or threatening, it just sort of seems like Maxwell Lord is trying to, well, as the expression goes, tug on Superman's cape, or Supergirl's cape in this, as it might be in this case. But make no mistake, if anything seriously bad ever happens to Jimmy Olsen, Superman's going to show up and he's going to be pissed and looking for answers. Which is kind of one of the downsides of having Jimmy on this show, is that we know that nothing super horrible is ever going to happen to him without Superman coming in. Now, granted, might say, it's like, okay, Kara, Jimmy got hurt, but, I'm going to trust you to handle the situation since this happened in your backyard. Now, okay, maybe Superman does that. But remember, Jimmy Olsen is also his best friend. Okay, I mean that's this whole thing, is that Superman's best friend is Jimmy Olsen. So the idea, that's pushing it, that he would do nothing on that one. So yeah, like that just sort of seems like Maxwell Lord's blowing smoke, and you don't want your villain to come across as somebody who's blowing smoke. And yeah, here they're very clear, like, yeah, Maxwell Lord's a bad guy. Well, whoop-de-frickin-do, we've already figured that out. How about giving us a little bit more on his motivation? Now, the question, of course, is, hey, who's that girl down in room 52 that looks exactly like Kara? Well, two possibilities come to my mind. There's Hope from the Lex Luthor Man of Steel miniseries, who I've talked about, well, it's just something I've talked about before on this channel, but she's kind of a long shot. Finding somebody that looks exactly like Kara, well, who's the Superman bad guy that looks like Superman? Okay, we know it's not going to be Cyborg Superman. And the whole, what was that, Black Eyes thing? Am I remembering that correctly? Well, alright, if it's not going to be Cyborg Superman, who's somebody else that looks like Superman? Bizarro. Now, granted, they've done a few other times where characters have looked like Superman, but traditionally, if you want bad guy who looks kind of like Superman, you're thinking Bizarro. Now, granted, Bizarro generally tends to look like this sort of weird, messed up, pasty Superman. but that's sort of just comic book exaggeration employed. If you're looking for something that's, well, let me put it this way: when they did Bizarro on Smallville, that's kind of what they did with it. And I have to say, I actually really did enjoy the Smallville version of Bizarro. Having him just sort of be like more like straight up evil version of Clark was kind of cool. I liked that. Now here, I kind of wonder if that's might like some kind of a mesh between the two is where they're going with. I mean, by that I mean I'm like a bit of a mesh between Hope and Bizarro, but we'll have to see. Let's see. Nothing really huge to say about Win this episode, although I did like him and Jimmy sort of teaming up to be the voice of reason and calming Kara down when she was like freaking out. Um, Again, Alex being made the interim head of the DEO. Well, of course, to us, the fans, that's no surprise. She's the only person at the DEO who we really know besides Henshaw as a character. So that made perfect sense. And her ultimately standing up to General Lane, that was cool. But the whole thing with General Lane, it comes back to what's the same problem with Non is that it's just bad guy cliche after bad guy cliche after bad guy cliche. I mean, here though, it's just General Lane is the typical military bad guy who just thinks like, you know, I'm a military man and I've been in the army for a long ass time and I've got all these guns and soldiers and any threat and blah 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 and morality has absolutely no place here at all. Which, of course, if you know anything about the military, is things like soldiers are legally required to refuse to obey illegal orders, for example. And torture. Okay, now granted, you can kind of make the case that Astra's not human, so therefore she doesn't exactly have human rights. But I would be very curious to know if that presidential order, putting General Lane in charge of this whole situation, also said, yeah, if you want to go and torture this some alien in order to get what you want, that's cool. I'm really a little disappointed that the DEO didn't say like, hey, did the president say you could torture people? Because we can ask him, but I don't know. That just felt like a missed storytelling opportunity for me. And again, it's just such a damn cliche. Really, can we find some way to give General Lane a little bit more depth than this? I mean, really. Especially this and the whole thing with Jimmy Olsen. It's just like, really? I mean, I guess that was an attempt at making him a little bit more human. But when he tells the story about the day the Earth stood still, he totally missed the point that the alien in that movie was still portrayed as being a good guy. That him coming down there and saying like, hey, you stupid little idiots, if you're gonna so hell bent on destroying yourselves, then I'm gonna basically say either you knock this off, or I'll freaking destroy you myself because that's what you apparently want to do. The whole point of the movie is that the alien is right, that we're being stupid, and this needs to stop. The violence is wrong, and it needs to stop. That's the whole point. And I've seen the movie he's talking about, the original one from the 1950s, not the Keanu Reeves thing, the actual movie General Lane is talking about. And my God, did that guy miss the point of that movie. He is exactly an embodiment of the wrong-headed thinking that that movie was preaching against. So F General Lane on his knowledge of the day the Earth stood still. Because that's a damn good movie. It holds up even after all these years. And you know another thing I like about that movie? Even though that was made back in the 50s when things were ridiculously racist out there, it took the time to show the various world leaders and stuff like that, people of different races, that this applied to everybody. It wasn't just white people from America. The whole human race had to get it through their heads that that needed to stop. And Lane is an idiot if that's what he walked away from the movie with. Okay, that movie is a classic for a reason. And I am getting way too worked up about this. Okay, so what else do we have to say? Oh yeah, Cat Grant. Leap tall buildings in a single bound. Okay, you realize that they don't really say that. They haven't said that really since the 50s, except as an ironic joke. And oh my God, truth, justice, and the American way. Look, this is one thing that really hates me. I really hate about people who are not into Superman. Okay, if you're not into Superman, fine. But for the love of God, understand this. They basically dropped that like 30 years ago. Superman doesn't say that anymore. Again, it's only popped up as sort of a pop culture reference, like a reference to the previous and old timey history of Superman. They basically had that sort of drop from this whole Superman mythology in the comics and stuff in like the 80s. Because let's face it, the American way in the 1980s was not always terribly easy to justify. And comics in general have always been a somewhat left leaning area of the entertainment world. And yeah, either basically, if you were around during Ronald Reagan's America, or at least understand the culture of the time, you can understand why trying to sell the American way as the superior way of life, it was a tough sell. Granted, it beat the major alternative at the time, which was communism, but well, let's face it, the 80s was also the decade that gave us Gordon Gekko's "Greed is Good" speech. So, yeah, make of that what you will. And what happened, the way they resolved that? Exactly what I talked about a couple of videos ago. Martian Manhunter impersonation. Now, I'm a little disappointed that Kara not being in on that didn't last a little bit longer, but okay, I'll let it go. Uh, but yeah, that ended exactly the way I talked about they had done it in the comics. La di da da. And yeah, and I know this is ridiculous, but watching Cat Grant like trying to eat that Japanese lunch, you can see she's got like sushi on her plate. He's got chopsticks, and she calls a freaking little teapot a cup. Like, lady, that's not a goddamn cup. It's a teapot. And then just sort of watching her. Okay, reminder, folks. I used to live in Japan. I spent 3 years of my life living there. I'm not going to be claimed to be the greatest expert in Japanese culture that there ever lived. But you learn certain things when you spend as much time living in that culture as I do. And a lot of the rules and things for the proper way to eat food and to do things when you're eating, Cat Grant has no frickin' idea how to properly the eat the Japanese way. Now, granted, she's American and she's eating Japanese food in America, so those rules don't apply. I understand that, but I'm just like, no, that's not right. But again, this is something that's just sort of unique to me because, like, when people around me get things related to Japan or Japanese wrong, it drives me up the wall. My own aunt, she had this stupid Facebook thing saying like, "Oh, my name means good good fortune in Japanese," and it had these like characters. And of course, they say this for every single person, the exact same. Like, oh no, it's like this is how you write your name in Japanese, and these characters mean this thing. And if you've seen, and I saw multiple people on my Facebook who had it, and it's all the same damn characters, and I had to go in there and say like, no, that's not what that's not right at all. And she's always like, oh, it's Facebook, who cares? I'm like, oh my God. Again, this is something that is unique to me, but it drives me up the wall. I mean, you should see me flip out when they like mispronounce a Japanese ingredient on like some cooking show. It is really a completely unbecoming reaction for a grown man to have, but it still happens. It's like it's not umibashi, it's umiboshi, you stupid fool. And yes, that I have actually flipped out about that while watching an episode of Chopped one time. It is completely irrational, but that's just the way I roll. Yeah, irrational rage about Japanese things and 1950s movies. America. God, I can't. God, I hate those people that go America. Oh God, I hate those people. F those people so hard. All right, I am completely rambling at this point, so I'm going to become. I'm going to call it here before I burst into flames or start speaking in tongues or something entertaining but extraordinarily disturbing. So, until next time, folks. Uh, as always, please follow me on Twitter at Hoosier Jedi. Of course, you can join me on Tumblr at Jedi Reviewer. And until next time, take care and have a good one.